First of all, everyone, I'm Michelle Addington. I'm Dean of the School of Architecture, and I want to welcome you to our lecture series. For those of you who haven't joined us before for our lecture series, this is quite an extraordinary season for us. Each and every lecture that's been curated by our committee, led by the intrepid David Heyman and Clay Odom, is a rich panoply of what's happening and who's thinking in the world this year. So it's a really exciting series. I'm looking forward to every single one. I'm particularly looking forward to this lecture. And it is my pleasure and my deep honor to introduce today's guest speakers, Yvonne Farrell and Shelley McNamara of Grafton Architects. Although they formed their practice nearly 40 years ago in Dublin, Ireland, and bucked the trend of eponymous firm names by choosing the name of the street their office was on, as such respecting both the place they worked and the community they were an integral part of, their work has always transcended the local, while nevertheless being inextricably wedded to the people it serves. Perhaps like a number of you who are sitting in on this lecture, I first came across their work about 10 years ago when they gave a lecture about their recently completed project of the School of Economics at Università Luigi Bocconi in Milan. Perhaps not like many of you, although I might imagine some, the first thing that came to mind for me when I saw the images was Aldo Rossi. Not because the work was derivative or reminiscent of Rossi's, not because Rossi was from Milan, but because it took me to the dialectic posed in Rossi's seminal text of 1966, The Architecture of the City. I'm not a student of theory, so I can't do justice to Rossi's argument, but it fundamentally was rewriting the old form-function argument about the role of architecture and rethinking the very nature of the architectural artifact in the city and as comprising the city. The monument took the place of form, and housing took the place of function. In this dialectic, Rossi positions the monument of being distinctly of its time, but yet timeless, and housing of its place by virtue of its use value, and yet placeless. Grafton's work is unquestionably monumental, even if not a monument, and fundamentally functional, even if not a generic use type. If Rossi thought of the city as through the composition of these architectural artifacts, then Grafton's buildings not only play the dual role of monument and use value in the city, but they themselves, each building, is the embodiment of the city. Civic and yet highly personal, formally didactic and yet sensitively contextual. The monumental character of their buildings elevates and magnifies not just the institutions within, but serves as a beacon that illuminates far beyond its borders. The understanding and cultivation of how and why people use space in their buildings creates not only the most intimate of moments now, but creates paths for relevant evolution of functions and uses in the future. They are often described as the architects' architects, but I would add that they should be thought of as the citizens' architects, as their work has never lost sight of the greater civic role that architecture has in its steadfast permanence, nor has it ever lost sight of whom it is meant to serve. It was a long time coming, but our profession and now the world has taken notice of what these extraordinary architects have accomplished. Their trophy table is sagging under the staggering array of international awards that they have received, not the least of which was the 2020 Pritzker Prize, for which they were only the 4th and 5th women to win in its 42-year history. I am so excited to have you here. And I know our students and the greater community of Austin, many of whom are sitting in today, are thrilled that you are joining us as well. So Shelley and Yvonne, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. Fantastic introduction.
That's beautiful, actually. We have to let those words seep in, Michelle. And just before we go to our images, first of all, we'd like to welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to see this tiled faces of friends and colleagues and other architects. But I'd like to begin by thanking formally Dean Addington, and to describe it as citizens architects. We really appreciate that. But the comments that you make really, I want to, I'm sure Shelley does too, that we'll really think about them deeply after this. Thank you. But it's also a great invitation to be virtually in Texas. So unfortunately, it's across half the globe. But it's also an honor to speak to students, because we're very aware that in their hands is the future. But it was interesting. I mean, we had met Dean Addington before, but then we find out that before, when she was studying and teaching in Harvard and becoming a professor at Yale before, she worked in NASA and the Goddard Space Flight Center. And we find this very interesting because I should have taken it down. This is something that we keep very close to us, you know, that the globe, when we talk about interdependence and sustainability, if there's two things maybe that people could ponder over themselves in the quietness of their own homes or wherever you're able to be in these unusual times, there are two things which are important to us. The earth as client, to wear on a t-shirt, and the other is the physics of culture. Because architecture can be called many things, but in the end, it is the physics of culture. And I'm going to talk about how ideas are shared, but essentially how the ordinary is vital. It's about judging dimensions, about courtyards and windows and light and air, about the pleasure of landscape, about breathing in and breathing out, warm air and natural convection and breezes from the sea. When Thomas Jefferson lived in Paris between 78 and 85 as American ambassador, there was a deep debate about new plans for hospitals in that city. The proposed hospitals were dealing with the then most up-to-date issues of medical science, well-being, and the protection from infection. The winning plans for 4 alternative hospitals proposed centralized lawns surrounded by pavilions connected with colonnades. And although the hospitals were never built, it is believed that they stayed in Jefferson's mind and influenced the layout of the academical village, the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. And the Pulitzer Prize winning architectural critic, George Goldberg, describes Jefferson's campus, and I quote, "an essay in balance, a balance between the built world and the natural one. The space of the lawn is really a room with the ceiling as the sky." So, end of quote. So for us, architecture incorporates people and needs and ideas, place and culture and construction materials. Architecture makes work at the service of others, knowing that each project impacts on people and this fragile planet, and both now and in the future. So our lecture today will be in 2 parts. I'll speak in the first section and Shelley the second, and I'll speak about a number of projects, some of which are built and some are at design stage with various materials. There's concrete and timber, and 2 of the buildings are in seismic zones in Peru and in the Republic of South Korea, and 1 is in twister territory close to yourselves over there in Arkansas. So now I just begin sharing. You're giving me sharing the screen, and I begin with images. Now let's just make sure I do this, and I share, and I start the show. Okay, is that shared? Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so we begin. It's very interesting for us to begin with this project referred to in the introduction to us. It's in, this is Bocconi in Milan. And it was a competition, and it was for 1,000 people. And it had, so these, I suppose it's really important for students. I think these are really important to show. We have a sketch, which is the DNA, the concept of raising the offices as a type of matrix raised in the air through which daylight can move to the to the lower levels, and that the ground is carved to let light below. This paper model, which is in 1:500, is a very simple description of how the ground is modified and how we change level from street level, dropping down 15 feet below. And this other paper model is really one in terms of the discipline of the structure at 75 feet with 11-foot diaphragm walls from which these office bars are hung. So the daylight arrives through. And in terms of the physics of culture, what is really very beautiful an experience when you stand below underneath here, because of shadow and because of the hot sun, you get natural convection. And for us, in terms of structure, this is a section, this is street level, this is a 66-meter cantilever, which projects over this space, which is a foyer space, 15 feet below ground level, dropping down to 27 feet down below here. And for us, what was important was bringing natural daylight into this main space. So these scoops of daylight bring natural light into this space, and these courtyards allow every professor to have a window to a courtyard which they can modify. And for us, architecturally, this 24-foot high clear glass window means that the relationship between this space, which is lined with a beautiful white marble called Bianca Lazza, brings light down. And going back to your dean as being a scientist, what is interesting architecturally is that light bounces not only down to that level, but down level, the level below. So our experiment, it was a bit of a gamble to move light or to presume that light would actually do it, but it does bounce like a ball. In terms of another place on this planet, this is a project, a competition that we did in Lima in Peru. And Lima is one of the few desert cities in the world. It's on the Pacific Ocean. It has this, it's 12 degrees down from the equator, so it should be very, very warm, very hot. But because of the von Humboldt current coming up from from Antarctica, it's kept at a modest in 20 degrees Celsius. And this was for a new university on a tight site beside a busy motorway, a beautiful residential area in one direction. And what we found really this is if you like, a building in a South American country we had never visited. One of our architects had, and we were really interested in the work of Méndez de Rocha and other really wonderful South American architects, taking the sense of structure as a liberating element. And here is the stadium in Dorado. And what interests us, not so much, but yes, the soccer stadium itself, but also the interstitial space that the structure allowed, the socializing space. So in this seismic site beside the cliffs, we, if you like, wanted to invent a vertical campus, very tight site for the amount of accommodation. And it was 350 meters long of a site. In terms of the needs, large laboratories, smaller teaching spaces, libraries, what we did in a type of Russian doll scenario, and also the beautiful terraces of Machu Picchu, where the small gardens. So we positioned the smaller spaces on the upper one, and the roofs of the larger spaces below become the intimate socializing gardens for students' work. And to build in this seismic area, the lower part is embedded in the earth. And these, I think these are actually made in Texas. These are the seismic isolators. They're 1.5 meters in diameter. I think it's Texas they were made, I'm not sure. But so you might have some claim on this building, guys. But here, this is embedded into the earth, and the rest of the building sits on it. And everything, what was interesting architecturally, we were in a place very hot, but pleasant. And we asked the architectural question, could you make a building in terms of its own sustainability that was unique because it was on this part of the earth, that we could capitalize on this type of climate? So what we, working with the client, all of the spaces that could be outside are outside, and only the rooms that needed to be contained are contained. So all the circulation is outside. And when you're a student, you're able to see from the circulation into the various research rooms of the building. So it was an environmental idea. It was an educational idea. So here we have, in terms of plan, the every 20 meters, we have a change of structure, and it shifts like a medieval city. It's not a singular line. So you get this sense of enclosure. And this image on the right-hand side is describing the interweaving of landscape on the motorway side. So you get this sense of a kind of a Piranesi sense of circulation within this structure, but also the weaving of landscape. And I'd like to share with you the wonderful thing about architecture is that you come across things that you probably should know, and that you come across. Von Humboldt is just an amazing person. I mean, this is a drawing called Naturgemälde, which is a kind of a synthesis of nature and data. And under the kind of earth as client, the simplicity of the scientific information he depicted when this was first appeared, the one drawing and the ideas, it shaped actually the way we are now inheriting as future generations to him, how the natural world is described. And it shows for the first time that nature was a global force corresponding to climate zones across continents. And it's interesting, von Humboldt, when he was leaving South America on his trip, he comes up, he's 34 years of age in 1804, and he makes a special trip to meet Thomas Jefferson in the White House, because the two shared so many ideas. So here are just, it's just an amazing coincidence in terms of learning about this sense of the earth as client. Really goes back also many centuries. So this is a project that's recently completed for us, not far from Paris, in a place called Saclay. We did a competition. It was an agricultural plateau chosen as a location for new research incentive academic campus and a business cluster. This university integrates, many of the Grande École, their leading universities, and they were making this as kind of a Silicon Valley on a plateau, if that's not an oxymoron. So we began the project. If you see down on this here is this little piece of stone. When we went to visit the site, it was really empty. It was open. And we kept this little piece of stone as a kind of a memory of the agricultural past of this place. And the competition was really for a huge part of the university. And looking at scale and dimension, these drawings on the right-hand side is the Palais Royal in Paris. This is a beautiful building in Milan, Ospedale Maggiore, built in the 15th century. This is our own city here. This is part of Trinity College. And under normal circumstances, each day on our way to the office, you walk through this beautiful campus and get a sense of dimension. So here is the competition, and we won this competition in Saclay. And what's interesting in terms of comparative dimensions, but also in terms of sustainability and the issue of the window and courtyard. So here are the simple courtyards of, say, the building in Milan with its 9 courtyards. Here we have a smaller courtyards and a larger courtyard in which required by the competition was 100 trees needed to be incorporated in the design. So this project, looking at a plan in more detail, is the series of courtyards, the main entrance, the 100 trees in real ground, and all the shared facilities of the university's cafes and large teaching spaces on the ground floor. And in terms of section, I'll just share this one with you, which is showing the trees in real ground, the narrow plan, allowing windows from each of the offices outward or inward to the courtyards. The main space of a kind of gathering within the building itself has this staircase system. Here is a photograph. In the photograph, you can see this ramp leading from this position to a room in the distance. So this is that ramp there, bringing it to the library, which sits in a pivotal position, looking out to the grand court and back into the socialized space. And for us, we took that little stone, we took the ochre color of the ground into the precast concrete fins, each of which are like a vertical contour protecting the windows. You enter in through this first courtyard, and you can see there is this level of transparency linking the outer spaces. And this is the largest courtyard with the trees. A competition that we built, that we entered a number of, this map, I'll just start with this map. It's from a book, The History of the World in 12 Maps by Jerry Bruton. And what we thought was really very beautiful is to look at this part of Asia and to see Korea as this piece into the ocean. And this was, for us, we were invited to do this competition. It was for a new special school, and it's affiliated to a college of education in the city of Gwangju in the Republic of Korea. And the clients, the requirements were that the school would be like a village surrounded by a vibrant ecosystem. They wanted a new model for special education, a space that draws the participation of the residents, both of the students, teachers, and employees, and also the residents of the region. And what really struck us about this schedule of accommodation was that this was a residential school for teenagers with intellectual disabilities, where they would attend as a boarding school for 3 years, and that they would that this would be a home for them for 3 years as they trained to be, if you like, members of society. And we found our team began, if you like, the initial research. We to try and have a cultural reference within Korea. And these are three of the if you like, historic building types. On the left-hand side is the Sanseong, which is the mountain, the citadel or the fortification. In the middle is the, if you like, the academy, the place of storytelling and learning. And on the right-hand side is the Hanok, which is the traditional Korean house type. And we thought this was absolutely beautiful, that this the academy, both in plan and in section. This plan drawing shows the kind of a precinct where you enter through, you enter underneath, you come to the first space, then you move through to kind of the inner sanctum. So you get in the section, the arrival, the first courtyard, the moving through and using of landscape, and this beautiful image of arriving below and coming to this upper court, but also being able to be enjoyed spatially in section. And this beautiful little drawing where you have the scholars viewing down into the entrance courtyard and the relationship of landscape. So for us, what was really interesting, I suppose, was that you had this country whose relationship to landscape is really very, very strong. That has 4 distinct seasons. The brief itself was residential and teaching and sports, and the site as part of the university was beside a mountain, and we wanted to integrate the mountain as part of not only of the campus but also of the making of the building. So here is our beginning of thinking of the this part of Korea has 4 definite seasons, summer, spring. I mean, they are extreme, but we wanted to integrate landscape and weather into the way we thought about it. So here is the the hannock, the plan where the centralized communal space and the sleeping areas around. Here is an image on the left-hand side. And in terms of context, we placed the hannocks where the teenagers would live, rather than dealing with the dormitory in the traditional boarding school, that each of the hannocks became like an apartment. So, and all of them face east, right out over the valley, relating them to the surrounding residences. And in plan, all the hannocks are facing east. We have the landscape moving in under the building. We place the sports building tucked into the edge of the mountain. And here we have if you like, what we describe as a school of welcoming edges. This is a type of colonnade along which the residences can move in and participate in some of the uses of the school itself. Here you're on the veranda looking through the garden out to the countryside. And then we had this idea that the teaching would become bridges. So these bridges span from the Hannock residential across to join the sports, and these become the, if you like, the protectors of nature. So nature flows down underneath these teaching bridges, connecting to the campus, but also allowing the sun to penetrate deep into this space. So this is really inviting nature into this and capturing it, so that contemporary work tries to honor, if you like, the Korean reverence for nature, and to embed it deep into this residential school. Closer to home, you probably don't need this, you know exactly where Arkansas is relative to where you are. But for us, this was a really important project because it was a competition. And I'd like to begin this section quoting from The Soul of Wood by Juhani Palasma. And I quote, "The significant mental task of architecture is to put us into palpable contact with the world, and thus heighten the reality and veracity of the world. Yet in our consumer culture, buildings are usually seen as solely visual and object, that they are expected to give rise to fantasy to the world, instead of reinforcing our sense of the real." So this competition was about a timber building. And for us, trees are worthy of deep respect. And as a sustainable building material, it's good for us to become informed about its possibilities. And for the Fay Jones School of Architecture in Fayetteville, the state of architecture, they really want to develop the timber industry. So this was a competition for a new center of timber research called the Anthony Timberlands Center. We entered this competition and we happened to, and happily, won it. In terms then of the local and timber, on the left-hand side here is a one-to-one pencil drawing by one of our students in the academia in Mendrisio, and this is of a beautiful a project done by Caminada in Switzerland. And what is really very beautiful is that in the canton of Grisons in Switzerland, this is a traditional timber technique called Strickbau, and it's really the, if you like, ways of understanding how timber can be put together. And he, Caminada, is a master of timber building. And below it are these beautiful buildings that we love in the kind of American tradition of kind of no-nonsense applied functional buildings that develop their own aesthetic by virtue of a conglomerate. And on the right-hand side is a project in Arkansas, you know, by Fay Jones, and it's the Thorn Crown Chapel, hidden in the middle of the forest, surrounded by, you know, oaks and pines and maple. But what's really interesting, going back to the connection with Jefferson in Paris, that seemingly it was inspired by Sainte-Chapelle, the Gothic church in Paris. But when we were doing the competition, we begin with kind of place and if you like, the physics of the place and the climate of Fayetteville. You know, we were surprised when we studied it that, you know, there's quite a lot of rain right across the full year. And we began this competition by thinking the fabrication hall, that we would consider a timber canopy. How would we find this kind of a relationship between the various rooms, specific rooms of study, but that the main focus would be the fabrication hall. And we thought about finding a response to the downpours and to think about the joys of rain, and that the canopy of the fabrication shop would be this kind of educational envelope. And we also wanted to think about timber, that rather than timber being a kind of a poor cousin of the kind of concrete system of building, that it would be amazing that a building could be a storybook of timber, that we would find that the range of timber, that it wouldn't be kind of anesthetized into some other form, but would try and celebrate itself for being with its strength and its grain and texture and color, and that there would be the smell of the material and the sensual qualities and the feel of timber. So we have this is, if you like, a drawing that describes what we would like to celebrate, you know, white oak columns, that we'd have some hickory, we'd have glulam beams, we'd have softwood trusses, and we'd have white ash, that people become, that there's that the intrinsic sensual qualities of timber could be celebrated, that this building would be like if you like, a resource, a storybook. And working with a fantastic engineer, Mark Quickby, we're developing this Queen Post Truss. So in terms of the great fabrication hall, there's also then the auditorium and classrooms raising in the upper part of the building. But to find the versatility of structure and structural systems that this Queen Post Truss system can provide. And it's interesting, when working with Mark Whitby, you know, one of the things he was referring to is Salisbury Cathedral in London, or in England, where these are there's a 123 meter high spire, and this is 14th century oak that's still doing its job. So the fantastic history and beauty of timber, and in our image, the fabrication shop becomes the heart of the building on a junction of a major road. You have the arrival, the working space. These images then describe the sense of the fabrication shop as being the heart of this educational building, that the relationship to the sidewalk, so that the general public can see into this space, so that the relationship between education and the general public, architecture can blur those dividing lines. And then you get this sense from Government Avenue in Fayetteville that you have this canopy to protect from the elements. And just the final image of this project is really that the ambition of the university would be that finding the presence of the university on the main street, that the new Antley Timberland Centre would be positioned as the tallest element along Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue along here. And we won this competition, and now we're moving forward with it, working with local architectural firm Modus, and a contractor, like in the American system, has already been appointed. So for us, this project is a wonderful opportunity to study the versatility, the beauty and strength of wood, and hopefully to make a timber instrument. Move over, Shell is going to continue now. Shell, can you hear?
Sorry about that.
Okay.
The projects Yvonne has presented are all outside of Ireland, but we should say that we were 25 years in practice before we worked in a foreign country, let's say, or in another place. And we're going to show this project in Dublin, which is a new city library. But before that, we just want to speak about the way that one maps and records and responds to cities and to place. And we love a quote by Raphael Moneo, "The city that accompanies you, the city you travel in and with." And that describes, in a way, I suppose, our grounding in our own place, in our own culture, and that equips you to somehow reach beyond. We also use this painting by Michael Caine, A Dublin Corner, and it relates to Manuel de Sola Morales, who has written a beautiful book called A Matter of Things. And he talks about how architects map or record or express the sensation of place, or in fact don't express the sensation of place enough. And his critique is that architects are very often too detached and too scientific in terms of how we think about place. So this for us is really about describing something, a way of describing something which reveals something about Dublin. And this red Georgian corner calls up a description by the writer Elizabeth Bowen, where she talks about the brick squares of Dublin, the brick surfaces, that the brick somehow seals up the light like an unopened orange seals up the juice. And really the point we're making is that in order to make a response to a place, you have to somehow immerse yourself into the feeling and the sensation of the place. And the next image. So this project, which is a Dublin City Library, it's behind the brick walls of 5 18th century houses, which are to the left of the stone building on that top image. The stone building is was the house of Lord Charlemont. It's where the paintings it's called the Hugh Lane Gallery, and it's our city gallery. And it has an arrangement to show the Hugh Lane paintings on a regular basis, which of course are in London. And then on the left, there are 5 18th century houses. And behind that is this new library, which we are undertaking. And in a way, this describes much of what you find in cities and in Dublin also, that behind the crust, the outer crust, there's another world embedded. And we have made this civic space, this rooflit space full of zenithal light. You come through the wall of the domestic houses and come through into this other world. And one of the things we found about designing a library was we were looking at a number of things. We were looking at Labrouste, who made beautiful libraries in Paris. And in a way, a bit like Yvonne's quotes about Jefferson, Labrouste speaks about the healing power of architecture, and discovering this or somehow this being highlighted in his work in the making of libraries. And he also has a beautiful way of describing a library as being a place of universal ties. And what we find important about the institution of library in contemporary culture is that it's the last democratic space in a way, because it's completely open to everybody. The librarians unconditionally exchange the treasures within. And there's something extraordinary about that and about working with that kind of idea. And the next image. So Yvonne was speaking earlier about how one stitches into place or connects with place. And the plan of this project is like a kind of piece of mercury, where we have the cracks and the 18th century wall, the houses where you make these connections through, and then behind this civic space, this place of zenithal light. The history of Parnell Square and the image in the top left is what it was. It was originally a pleasure garden, now not in great shape. And so our idea was to somehow reinstate this idea of the pleasure garden in the way that we would think about the library and integrate landscape into the mass of the urban block. Go to the next image, Yvonne. And we used lifts and staircases to lift gardens up in the air. And we were very much, I don't know if any of you have read Gulliver's Travels. It's a satire written by Dean Swift. But in that book, he talks about the floating islands of Laputa. So we have these floating gardens which form the roofscape overlooking the pleasure garden, what was the pleasure garden of Parnell Square. And we make connections then which are more acupunctural into the rear of the Georgian houses which overlook the street. So it's a combination of domestic spaces and new space. And the structure and the way of thinking about the space behind was to liberate this so that it feels like almost like an external space. Next image. And then the connections to the existing repaired, now not in great shape, but will be repaired, that kind of rough wall that we make these bridges which connect through this wall back out to the city. And the next image. And that's a really important project for us in terms of dealing with the program of library. And I suppose we've been very lucky dealing with competitions that we've won have related to either universities or this next project, which is for a library in Kingston in London. But as a lead into the next project, we just wanted to use this wonderful plan, one of the oldest drawings, the 9th century drawing of a Benedictine monastery. It was the monastery of St. Gall. And what we love about this plan, in the way that perhaps Manuel de Sola Morales talks about how we map cities, you can see the life of the monastery in the way that this plan draws you right into it, and how important this is in terms of the drawings we make for ourselves, that they become like stories, maybe like the way the Von Humboldt mountain becomes a story in the image that Yvonne showed. But it's also how important the monastic model is for us in architecture, which we used in the Institute Mean Telecom that Yvonne has just shown, and that was also based on the Ospedale Maggiore. But the wonderful thing about this plan is that it describes the richness of what the world could be if it was not so compartmentalized, and that the monastic model is a carrier and a protector of culture and learning, and it's not just a religious institution. And that in this map, in this plan, we have churches and houses and stables and kitchens, workshops and breweries, and it's a self-sufficient place. And it's somehow symbolic of the importance of making places which aren't single program and which aren't about compartmentalizing certain uses and certain people within our social structures. Next image. And for the Kingston Townhouse, this is a library combined with dance. And what's wonderful is it has that proximity of unexpected uses, very noisy beside very quiet. It's also, it's called a townhouse because the idea was that it would make something welcoming and open both to the community and to the students, that it's not in the ownership of any of the individual departments within the university, that it is a townhouse for all students. And we made this kind of inside out building where there's movement on the edges and stepped terraces and gardens. And in the distance, it reaches, you can see the Thames and Hampton Court. So it was this idea of a loose framework which would invite the world of the community in and would make a kind of loose weave of interactive spaces. So if we go to the next image, we call this project a warehouse of ideas. The program was wonderful in terms of its educational vision. And while many of our projects are about walls, we're quite fond of walls and surface. In this project, we made something which was really porous, and we used the kind of loggia or the gallery which wraps around the space, the interior space, for a number of reasons, because we're also pragmatic and we're very practical, that it works for fire escape, so that if you escape to the edges of the building, the interior of the building can be more free and open. But it's also an amenity for students. And actually, post-COVID, this is proving really important, that students can always move out to an external space for amenity or to somehow connect with the bigger world. So this warehouse of ideas, and it looks quite simple in plan, but actually it's quite complex in the way that we've manipulated the volumes. It's a very deep plan, so it's like a kind of piece of fabric where there's large and small spaces which can happen within. Next image. And the heart of, we're always looking for something which is the kind of the cartilage or the heart or the thing that holds a project together. And there was a requirement for a lecture theatre, and we felt that the black box lecture theatre, if you've ever visited an Alvarado lecture theatre where there's always windows where you can see the sky, you wonder why the black box is used so often in a university situation or in any kind of learning situation. And so we made this central courtyard, which can be for lectures or events, and that becomes the heart of the project. And then around that, we've wrapped the dancing studios, and then the library spaces climb up over the compartmentalized spaces. We loved the bulletarium by the Greek tiny little cracks in rocks very often, where there's this sense of intimacy, and that's always something that we're concerned about in making spaces, that somehow it has this intimate quality. And the top plan on the left is Salle Courtauld, and it's one of our favorite buildings, because again, this kind of Auguste Perret makes this wonderful space where he talks about giving sound its liberty. It's interesting in relation to this project, sound became like weather, where we had to deal with noisy and quiet. Next image. So this is the central courtyard, which is the democratic space, which can be used when it's empty by students or when it's full. It can be closed off and made dark for theatrical events. The dance studios are on the ground and also on the first floor. They can use it to make their entry for a performance. The library spaces are on the floor above and can look into the space so that you always know what's happening, that it's a kind of throbbing heart where you can have visual connection, but at the same time have acoustic privacy. And that's something that we find is really important, is that casual overlap that happens and needs to happen in all of our daily lives. And it's why we miss not being able to engage with this world, the casual world of the street, in an easy way in our lockdown situation. Next image. And just how lovely it is to find dancers rehearsing or spilling out from their dance studios before a lecture or before an event. And that's something that we always think about in the making of programs, or those who do make the programs of buildings, is why shouldn't opposites come together and enrich both? Next image. And then the thing of the porosity of the edge. The bus stop is just forward of the colonnade or the loggia. People waiting for the bus can take shelter in the loggia or use the cafe. And then there's the liberty that the frame gives you in terms of the interaction of the interior spaces, which is the image on the left. Next image. And then quite a different requirement, but in the same city of London. This is the London School of Economics overlooking Lincoln's Inn Fields, 55-metre frontage, overlooking this really important space in the heart of London. And on the other side of Lincoln's Inn Fields, we have the John Soane Museum, which is very sobering to know that somehow John Soane is over there watching us. It's one of our favourite buildings. It's incredibly complex, wonderful labyrinth of tiny spaces and discoveries. In the London School of Economics, we very dense program on a very let's say, busy part of London. And it's almost like a shoreline between the tiny streets which happen behind what we call our palazzo type building. And we made a kind of a risky decision when we were doing this competition, which was to try and free as much space as we possibly could, which would be unprogrammed and which would release the life of the university and make a connection with the citizen of the city. And in a way, the theme of our Biennale came from thinking about this building and thinking about what each project can give back to the city. And what free space could we make, which is either the free space which might be a doorway, or it might be a bench, or it might be a warm wall which soaks up the sun, or it might be a great hall. In this case, it is. Next image. So what we did was there's also the challenge of having a very large sports hall, which is the dark grey mark on the plan on the top left, an enormous sports hall in the basement level, lower ground level, and then up above having much smaller offices, which is the kind of diagram of structure on the right hand side. And we discovered this space, the stone groin vaulted space in Lincoln's Inn Chapel, which is right beside Lincoln's Inn Fields. And we loved this space because it's completely open, and the chapel is in the upper world, and you go up a staircase and there's no door until you get to the top of the staircase. And there was something beautiful about that. And there's a philanthropic institution in this School of Economics, and this undercroft was also a philanthropic space. It's a sad story, but it's true that unwanted babies were left in this space and were taken in by the lawyers of Lincoln's Inn, and these children were raised or protected. And so we thought about this as being the transfer structure between the huge space at basement level and the tiny, smaller, much smaller office spaces up above, that somehow you would walk in the transfer structure. So rather than burying a truss or trying to bury a big truss, that we would walk in what was happening within the structure. And that's why we talk about in dialogue with gravity. And we're very interested in that ancient sense that one gets of feeling the forces of gravity as you move through a building. So the next image. This is under construction at the moment, but this was the competition image, the idea, or no, it's developed image actually, this idea of making a great hall, which could make the connection between the world of the university and the world of the city. And up above would be lecture rooms and research offices, and down below place for sport. Next image. And this is under construction, due to finish the autumn of next year. And we use this tree-like structure, which goes from the big trunk and the big branches at the lower level, becoming smaller and smaller as it moves up. And it also rotates and plans from being diagonal to being orthogonal. So it's quite a complex thing to make this transfer step by step from the big span of the sports hall to the smaller span of the Great Hall to the smaller span of the lecture theatres, which happen on the upper floor, to the much smaller spans. So it happens in sequence. The next image. And we make these big stairs, which hopefully 400, it's designed to take the numbers on the floor above, which are lecture theatres, where there's approximately 400 students will be going up and down the stair. So they would never have to remove themselves from the life of the Great Hall, that they could safely use this ribbon of space which connects the ground to the upper world. Next image. And then these structures penetrate right up through the building to make this kind of forest-like space and this structure which is doing a job both spatially and architecturally. Next image. And this next project is one we've just finished also in November. We finished 3 projects in the same month in 2020, which was the Kingston Townhouse, the Institute Mean Telecom, and this is the University of Toulouse. We did this competition directly after finishing the Bocconi building, so it was about 2009 or 2010. And we were really challenged by Toulouse because it's such a beautiful, picturesque city with this huge river and these. Yvonne spoke earlier about infrastructure. The infrastructure of the city in relation to flooding is extraordinary, with these big brick retaining walls, these man-made raised boulevards protecting from the ferocity of the Garonne. And the little bridge just in front of our building, which Yvonne might point to because it's quite secretly hiding in the trees. Our building is behind that. That's the Midi Canal, which is a fantastic canal leading into the river. And the next image. Toulouse is a brick city, and so we and our site is right beside a medieval wall. It's actually a breach in a medieval wall, which again was extremely challenging. As how do you take your place with a contemporary building with this beautiful wall? And what we decided was to come right up and go as close as possible without touching, which we're not allowed to do, so that we somehow thought about the building as being a continuation of this brick surface. And the site is, as you can see, is a very complex shape. It's at the junction of the old city and the new city, and the junction of the university world and the squares and streets of Toulouse. And we started to think about this building being like a kind of sundial. And unlike the Bocconi building, where all the public rooms are on ground or below ground, we lifted the lecture theatres and the public rooms we lifted them right up and made these gaps between them. We thought about them as being kind of like boulders, and between these boulders of space that we could make these big windows, which would connect the interior court to the beautiful city beyond. Again, in terms of climate, the central courtyard is protected from wind and rain, but it's external. And that's to do with the fact that Toulouse is very hot in the summer and doesn't get too cold in the winter, but also that so many of the courtyards we visited had semi-external staircases and were just so beautiful, because that whole thing of the delay of that line, that barrier between city and between the public and private is somehow delayed, so that you can bring the life of the city right into a building. Next image. And some of the references we looked at were first of all, we loved this broken heart feeling of Toulouse as a city. And on the right hand, we have the amazing brick buttresses that we found for the churches in Toulouse. And then this tiny window to the sky on the top right hand, where there's these tiny courtyards in the Roman city part of Toulouse. So we were really interested in this thing of framing the sky as well as framing the city. And we really kind of made a collage of the elements we found in Toulouse, like the cloisters and the courtyards and the colonnades and the big brick buttress walls, which you can see we're beside a Romanesque church. And we used the fire escape stairs again to make these heavy feet, which would anchor the building and give us the kind of surface we needed to give the building a presence onto the city. Next image. And we were really happy to discover that the builders in the site hut, all these plans were hung on the wall, and they called this project the Butterfly. And we found that fantastic, because we didn't realize when we were making this that there is an element of metamorphosis that happens, because you can see from the plans that it starts as a grounded, buried perimeter block, which almost has a different organization or order. And then as it comes up, the elements become more and more free, so that on the top floor, the only thing that holds the floating blocks, the flying butterfly, if you like, that holds them together is the central spine of the building and what we call the sky cloister. So it has to read as if it has a certain mass and presence, but it also, in terms of the way we carve it, when you look at the sections, that it also has a sense of space, or like a kind of a belly of the building, this kind of interior heart, which is probably a nicer term. Next image. And then all of the walls are modulated in terms of light and shade. The folded wall to the right faces south, so it's protecting from the sun. We worked with the same engineer, Klaus Bode, in modulating all of the different surfaces. So the building kind of inhales and exhales, and the brick perforated walls are to do with smoke extract as much as to do with light and air. And these are the walls within which the fire stairs and the day-to-day stairs happen. And then the elevated cloister forms protection to, they have this wonderful thing where they have cocktail terraces between their lecture theatres, which we thought was so civilized. So if we go to the next image, Yvonne, then there's, not unlike Dublin, where the wonderful thing about brick is that it soaks up the sun. And this is where we come really close to the medieval wall, and we found the same bricks in a brickyard just outside of Toulouse. They make the same size bricks. We were able to use the same mortar, and there's a mix of about 4 different bricks in order to get that different levels of burning, to get that kind of richness. So so that there would be a sense of continuity between the existing and the new. Next image. And then how it relates to the city, which is important in terms of the social and the educational ethos. The image on the right we love because you have 2 students standing, but somehow connected with their place, which is something we think is really important, that you're always reminded of where you are and you get the smell of the city or the noise or the sound of the city. And it also acts as a kind of, on the image on the left, it holds the form. It gives, the sky cloister allows the world of the professors to connect across and come down through the stair. And it's like as if the cloister starts in the sky and comes down to the ground. It disappears and reappears, or the other way around. It starts on the ground and ends up in the sky. And that is an important thing in terms of the way that this building is used. Next image. And that feeling of moving through inside-outside spaces, let's say. And it's one of the things that we got a lovely letter from one of the professors saying how much he loved that feeling of always being able to move easily to the outside and retreat to his or her private office. So you're looking down into the central heart of the project, which is still outside but protected from wind and rain. Next image. And then again looking at that thing of the student world and how the intimacy of the interior worlds, the red doors into a lecture theatre, and then you get this big window to the city beyond. Next image. And at night time, how on buildings we always have to deal with defense and security, which is the reality of cities, but that somehow needs to also be friendly. And it's one of the things we love about Dublin is that the 18th century houses are hugely defensive, but also really beautiful. So as architects, we have to solve these conflicting requirements, but still make beautiful threshold spaces, which are inviting and welcoming to the citizen. Next image. And I'm just going to finish with 2 competitions. The first one is a competition we did in Tokyo for a new Irish embassy. And we were really enthusiastic about this project in terms of one of the questions asked was how could we represent Irish culture in Japan, which was a kind of tricky question. And one of the things we felt was that it's called Ireland House, and a bit like Townhouse, that there's something about Ireland is noted for its welcome, whether it's true or not. We think it's quite true, but that there's a place of welcome and a house, and that somehow the embassy would feel like a house or a home as much as a public building. We also became intrigued by the potential of using a timber construction, and because we were working in Japan, we were looking at Chinese and Japanese constructs and structures, and we became obsessed with this reciprocal structure idea, the idea of making large spans with small elements. And the next image, and of course with the moon. And I should say that if we go back to the last image, we started to study Katsura in great detail, and we discovered that that Katsura is where it is because of a book called The Tale of Ganji, written in the 11th century. It was the first novel, and it was written by a woman called Murasaki Shikibu. And in that book, she says, far away in the country village of Katsura, the reflection of the moon upon the water is clear and tranquil. And that's why that emperor chose Katsura to build in that place. So it also relates to something we're really interested in, is that thing of moonlight and sunlight and those elements. Next image. So the reciprocal structure, which we discovered in the Japanese and Chinese tradition, is to do with jointing, but it's also to do with making big spans from small elements. And the four hands of Grafton was us looking at this idea of the reciprocal nature of an embassy in terms of overlap of cultures, but that also we might make a structure which represented this, that it can hold great weights by virtue of this interlocking capacity. But we're also really interested in Katsura, which the middle drawing is us studying the scale of structure, and that spaces can be so labyrinthine and so rich. And we were trying to make our plan on the right was a plan of our Ireland house. Next image. And that was really, I suppose, an experiment in thinking about how one might build in a place like Tokyo, which has incredible rain and incredible climate, incredible extremes. But we really liked this image of making something which would feel domestic and which would have a kind of ancient sense of landscape within what was a very tight site. And the final image I'm using because I'm interested in your school, which we have heard about for a long time, and also, as you know, we teach as architects, and this is how one project can feed into another. We did this competition immediately after the Tokyo project, and we were continuing this research into reciprocal structure, but here it was to do with an idea of a new school of architecture. And as teachers and as practitioners, we were really interested in what is it you might do? And the question posed is, what is the role of a school of architecture now? Which is a very big question. And we were trying to think about economy of means and using this idea of making a canopy of light and using a structure which might make the series of spaces that a School of Architecture studio needs, that we could use small elements to make large spans so that it's not a mega structure. And then we started discovering the potential of this rotating grid, which is so beautiful, that it can work axially or diagonally, and that the top little sketch is the potential to make roof lights and the gaps between the structure. So we became really obsessed with this as a kind of canopy of trees. And I think there's just one more image of that, Yvonne, is there? Yeah. And I just want to end with this image, and it's really to do with the fact that we're teaching, or that we're speaking in a school. And one of the things that we were very interested in was the fact that you have interdisciplinary studios, and really we're really impressed by the idea that you reach out to the city and to elected officials, and that you act as a support to decision makers. And that seems like a really amazing thing to have achieved, because so many schools of architecture are detached from the city around them. And it's really also to do with how much architecture has to offer now more than ever. Everybody's saying it's a crisis and what do we do and all of this kind of thing. But what we think is that right now we believe in architecture more as a transformative force and as a positive force than we've ever done. And we also feel that because this is a moment of doubt and confusion and potential collapse of certain structures or not, that it's a moment of opportunity because architecture, the values of architecture, in our experience, have so much being under threat and not given their rightful attention. And when we were doing the Venice Biennale, we know that you're also interested in climate justice, and it just happens that Mary Robinson, the former President of Ireland, and she was UN Commissioner for Human Rights, and she also ran a foundation called Climate Justice. And when she came to the Venice Biennale, she was really struck by the role of architecture, and what she asked and made a kind of call to arms, that architecture has the capacity to make new imagined worlds better than the present world. And she talked about the architecture having the possibility of making a narrative of hope. And we found that really fascinating, because so many of the projects were related to the theme, the Earth as Client, and that she somehow was completely excited about this, the role of architecture in communicating possibilities rather than telling one what the awful things were going to happen. And parallel with that, the other thing we're really interested in terms of teaching, and in the Biennale, we had a section called The Practice of Teaching. And we described the studio as a laboratory of the imagination. And again, it's something that's possibly undervalued, is the imaginative capacity of young and old people. And just before I go to that, I just want to make a point about what it is that grounds us as architects. What's wonderful about being an architect is that you're actually dealing with the ground. You're dealing with physical artifacts. You have to use materials. You're connected with the physical world. So we're connected, and we're also connected to the legacy of architecture. At a time when I think so many people feel lost, we feel even more connected to the legacy of architecture. And I was reading recently in an article called Grand Illusions by Pankaj Mishra, fantastic Indian writer. And he was talking about a book called In Radical Hope, Ethics in the Face of Cultural Devastation by a philosopher, Jonathan Lear. You probably know about him because he's American, based in Chicago. But he talked about the implications of nomadic peoples being forced to settle in a settled existence, and that they not only lost their immemorial world, but they also lost the conceptual resources to understand their past and present. And I found that really frightening as an idea, that one could be in a state of mind where it's almost like you're cut off from your culture or your past or your present, and that you're completely dislocated. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because I was listening to a young journalist last week who is passionately involved in the Irish language. And of course, the Irish language is a semi-lost language. Yvonne speaks it, which is brilliant, but so many people don't speak it. But he made the case that in the Irish language, there's hundreds of words for the dream world, and that in the language, the boundaries between the dream world and the so-called physical world is blurred. And I think there's fantastic force in that, which is working in the laboratory of the imagination, that is the real world as much as the so-called real world. And one of the reasons why we teach is that we know that creativity and imagination, it's not gender-based, and it's certainly not age-based. And the youngest architect can make the most brilliant observation. So we're really just saying it sounds hello to all the students, and it's a great place to be, and it sounds like you have a fantastic school, and we hope we'll meet you one day. Thank you.
Well, Shelley and Yvonne, I wish you could hear the deafening applause that is coming from all corners of this place, because that was just a remarkable lecture in so many different ways, and so dense and rich in the types of threads that we could be unpacking now for weeks on end. And I hope that we do. Do you have a few moments for questions from the audience?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
So we're going to have questions from a couple of different places. So for those of you who are on Zoom, if you could please either use the hand raising function or put your question in the chat. I'll get through it there. And Leora and Megan are going to collect the questions that might arise on YouTube. So while that is coming in together, I'm going to start with a question. I have so many, but let me start with one that was really sort of kind of speaking to me as I was looking at the work. You know, when people call you an architect's well, not an architect's architect, but architects. You know, almost always that expression is used when there is a sort of a recognition of autonomous form. And there's no question that your work is formally very powerful, but it's form of a different ilk. I mean, it's a form of the very powerful interior voids, the voids in which you know, activity occurs, and so much of the construction is read through what is the organization and the interconnections between that formal interior, the formal massing, as you might say, of a void on that. And, you know, very different than what you might think about in formal autonomy. There's not as didactic an envelope, you know, an envelope, whether it's as mass, whether it's as a wrapper or a skin, or even the way that some might define a facade. And I'm really interested in the moment of the facade, because you do talk some about the facade, but the facade, or what is absent on the facade, whether it's in its connection and relationship with the city, whether it is in the way that you're dealing with mediating the environment of the building, whether it is in sort of the thought of a seamlessness of how people might engage and come through the building. I'm very interested in how you think about approaching the facade on your buildings, or how you start thinking about approaching what it is as what defines the perimeter of your space, and whether it is meant to be a signal, something semiotic beyond, or whether it is something that is also very functional in terms of what you're hoping to glean from the interior.
Yvonne, do you want to take that?
I can start. Thank you, Michelle, for that. A few things spring to mind when you talk about the kind of interior voids. We often refer to the fantastic Spanish architect Alejandro de la Sota has used the phrase that architects should make as much nothing as possible. And we are fascinated by that in fact, it's the space in which people stand. So the issue of the thing, going back to the kind of quote from Johannes Palasma, that and also Shell referred to the Venice Biennale, where we want to talk about free space and not about an architecture as object. You know, it's not the thing wrapped up. You know, it's not the beautiful object necessarily. It's the thing between we're most interested in. And when you ask about, you know, seamlessness and blurring boundaries. I mean, the kind of Ray's sketch about the 1,000 offices in Bocconi, about the city kind of wandering in, or the show is very interesting. I live quite close to the sea, and in these lockdown days, to watch the tide come in and the tide go out, you realize that, you know, that there are great plazas of space that where people move, and the seamlessness. I like the terms. Then you ask about facade. I think the kind of wrapping, or I mean, one of the things is to avoid having windows as much as possible, so that zenithal light, like in the image of the library that Shelley is referring to Le Proust and the beauty of light, that zenithal light, or John Soane building across from our building in London. I mean, Soane is a master of light, and so I think the thing of light and facade. And recently was there's an amazing structure about an hour from here in Dublin, and on midwinter, it's the solar angle. This is from about 5,000 years ago. They have captured the rising morning sun at solstice, and the light that penetrates deep into kind of this man-made mountain is extraordinary. And this year was very interesting because of COVID. There was nobody allowed, you know, there's about 20 people if by lotto you're able to attend with archaeologists, but because nobody could go there, they had all the photography, so it was empty and silent and a perfect morning. And the light, sorry, I'm rambling in terms of the point, but this is really that light, how you deal with light. And to get to your discussion about the perimeter and the facade, in the project of Institute Mean Telecom, where it was, you know, hundreds of offices, and the thing of being able to give everybody a window that opens. The same is true in Bocconi. You all have a window that can actually open or close to a little balcony. That the facade is also the threshold between inside and outside. You can make it animated. It can be, like in Bocconi, it was interesting. One of our architects was is a wonderful musician. And she came with her cello and played in one of the courtyards, and all the windows of the balconies of the professor's offices opened. What was this curious cello playing architect doing in the space? So the window is the threshold between a private world, and especially in the COVID time, when natural ventilation and being able to open the window and not rely on mechanical systems that mightn't be up to scratch. So I think the perimeter, like we've just finished or just finishing a building here in Dublin City, where it's in the 18th century Georgian street, one of the main facades. And we've developed, if you like, a 21st century version of the sash window in terms of the street. So I think it depends. If the window is the facade, the eyes of a building to relate. So sometimes we make them open, and sometimes we hide them, and they're part of the repertoire. So I don't think the perimeter is one of the creative surfaces. We're not anti-window, and it hasn't to always have windows, but windows are good things.
We do approach the facade with fear and trepidation, and in fact, when we're teaching, very often we allow students to not think about expression, to think about the space, because it's so difficult, that moment of what is the expression of the building between the inner world and the outer world. So it's not easy. I think what we have found, though, is that we don't think immediately about facade. We think, well, what kind of outdoor room are we making, and what kind of indoor space? And it's that membrane between the two, and what are the climatic requirements and all of those things. But it's hard.
It is so hard, and
Yeah.
I know it's also something that really comes up very much for students as well. It's a profound concern that so many have. Eric Hayes has his hand up. Eric, would you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, ma'am. So I thought it was interesting that you said that you worked only in Ireland for 20 or 25 years, and you're named Grafton Architects. And I'm just wondering how that transition from local firm to international firm happened, and if you feel differently about buildings down the road in Dublin than you do about buildings in Arkansas or Peru.
Well, the transition happened through sheer luck. Somebody put us on a lift for a competition, and we went for it like the hammers of hell, as we say in Ireland, and we were unknown, relative outsiders. But to tell you the truth, we felt ready. We felt ready because in some ways, and translators speak about this, in order to translate a language, you have to go deeper into your own language. And what we felt when working in some ways, it's really hard to rediscover the language of your own place in a fresh way because you're familiar with it. So when we spent 20 years doing this, how to go deeper into our own culture and find ways of renewing that culture in some way. When we went to Milan, it's like we could see things, we could see the special things that were ordinary for Milanese architects were extraordinary for us. Like the thing of the Ceppo stone for them was ordinary. We found that extraordinary. And we found the fact that they could build walls with 3 to 4 millimeter joints rather than those big joints we have to use in Ireland for building regulation codes, unless you use solid stone. And we found the way they dipped the pavements for the road to meet the pavement, and the fact that they used stone on the roads and concrete on the pavements, and the fact that the buildings were so solid, and some of them felt like pieces of geology because they used these strange stone that we hadn't seen before. And there was, so we were thrilled to get out and see if we could make something in another place, and it was really refreshing. It was really liberating and really refreshing. We also got really worried that we would never get a project in Ireland again, because after the 2008 recession, we didn't get a new project in Ireland for about 8 years. And we felt really sad. My God, we're not going to get work in Ireland again, because, you know, you love working in your own place, your own city. And now what's fantastic is we're starting to get work in Ireland again. So the combination is really good, but we are very grounded people, and we are very connected. And I think that's very important, that you have baggage, as we say. You know, you come with baggage. You're not an empty suitcase, you know. So we've really enjoyed it, actually.
I think to add to that, 2 things, Eric. One is that it's a value system, that place matters, and that everywhere where you are now has its own, you know, we had this in the beginning, you know, you're somewhere over here now because the sun is on you, and we're on the same little ball out in the middle of space, and your dean can tell you more about the universe than I can. But we have to mind this thing. And I think that what Shelley has said is that there were certain values that we had built up about construction and valuing, like in Toulouse, to make a building that frames the wonderful things in Toulouse, or that where you are, when you make buildings, that a person, when they stand in your building, see something in a new way or in a stronger way, because you as an architect have framed how beautiful the ordinary is. That just is, it can be the ordinary. And I think to add to it as well, when we won the competition and then the clients came over to have a look, we kind of thought, oh my God, our buildings are smaller. They're not going to give it to, you know, let us do it. But there's also a level of trust and belief. And when they saw the projects that we had done, they said, yes, you can do it. I think there's an awful lot, Shelley referred to luck, and there's timing, and there's generosity, and there's belief. Like the president of the project of the university in Toulouse, you know, such a cultured person who believes in architecture. you know, and sometimes the projects that are the hardest is when the people don't believe in architecture. You know, they're kind of stuck with you by mistake. It's kind of like a bad dating kind of structure, that if you get the right combination of a good client who believes in architecture and is willing to work in the slipstream of some other category, well, then projects somehow blossom. Some projects are harder than others because there isn't that shared value system. So I hope you come across very generous people in your life, Eric.
Me too.
You probably, thank goodness we have small sort of vignettes, because you wouldn't see the tears welling up in my eyes at those comments. They were so beautiful. I haven't seen any other questions or questioners pop up. I did want to share that while you were speaking, there were some comments floating around, particularly in how moved and I'd say inspired people were by the way that you threaded through all of this with this sort of landscape of ideas, the history, the maps, the cultural references, how all of that was sort of woven into the way that you think about things. And it makes me want to go back and rewrite my introduction. And instead of putting it as a dialectic and the binary about sort of like form, and then of course the idea of autonomous form as the monument and the very local, that it's also kind of the inflection point really is in this sort of very rich and sometimes fairly ephemeral history of ideas is where it begins to push back one way or another. I'm going to rewrite my whole introduction now and that central part.
Send it to us, Michelle, because what is amazing to be in a group, and I know it's virtual, but it's lovely to see all these human faces. It's an amazing community, and I think for just that architecture, you know, matters, and it affects people's lives socially, physically, emotionally. Shell was you know, quoting Le Proust about the, you know, the thing of you know, health in building, how they affect it. We had there's an amazing he's a professor in Trinity College. He's deals specifically in this issue of COVID, unfortunately. And he came to speak to us at our coffee lectures recently. And one of the things he said, don't forget, you know what I mean, that beauty matters, that beauty affects health, and that not necessarily beauty, because sometimes that can go into the realm of, oh yeah, you know, but just real things that are done as well as possible, that they enrich people's lives, and they are health. There is good for you. You know, in these times, I'm sure everyone, I'm sure it's a very difficult time for you there too.
Yes.
But that architecture does matter.
It really does. And I think you're right. It's profound what we've realized about the very spaces that we construct and the way that we construct community within that, because this is the great loss that we have. I can't thank you enough for being here. Priscilla, you have your hand up. Did you want to ask a question? Maybe have that be our last question, or were you?
Yes, I think Lalitha also had a question. I don't know if she wanted to ask it first, or
you should ask first. You should ask first.
Okay. So you spoke a little bit about kind of the client and how important it is for you know, it to be a good partnership, and that they had to believe in architecture. I was wondering actually how y'all both met each other, and how, I mean, that's kind of a little bit more personal, but how did you know you would make a good team, I guess?
We didn't. We had no idea whatsoever. There was nobody better around.
Thanks, Shell.
Okay, we were students together, and we got on, and we thought we were great, and we joined up and hoped for the best. I don't mean to sound, we were passionate about architecture, and we didn't know where it was going to go, but we set up practice in a way that you probably couldn't do now with no building experience whatsoever. A year after we finished in college, and luckily we had one partner at the time who was older than us, and he knew something about building buildings because we were 5 when we started. But Yvonne and I have always, even as students, we used to work together, and there's a kind of a respect there, and really a kind of trust in each other's judgment, and that's really important. That we know when something feels authentic or true, and when it doesn't. And I know that sounds simplistic, but it's very important because it is to do with the deeper values and understanding of architecture. And we just set off on a path, and yeah.
If I could add to that, recently I've discovered that the Brent geese that fly from Canada to Ireland in the wintertime fly in flocks together. And when they're together, they're seemingly at the tips of their wings are tiny little white feathers, and they know, to keep close enough but not too close, and kind of don't bump into another in flight. I think that's maybe a good metaphor for Shell and I, that we are friends, we are architects, that there's tremendous respect, and like in any relationship over time, when there's respect and watch another person grow, and worry about the specification of a mortar joint that's that size as well as city, it is an amazing thing to watch as well. And we're part of a fantastic group of people who work together and in cooperation and in overlap, and that it's a bit like Michelle's question and the thing of a facade or the space. It's kind of that architecture is a spatial phenomenon, that is a collective thing. You know what I mean? No one person can do everything, even from not just the designing, but the structure and the building. If you lined up all the people from client to it was really amazing. We were in London last year, and that beautiful staircase that Shell showed in the London School of Economics, we got chatting to the workmen as they were making it, and it turned out that one of the workmen was from the village that Shelley was born in, and here was a guy making this incredibly complex thing and trying to make this beautiful, and you realize that from the idea to the making are a huge number of people. So from college together and working together and supporting through various life and recessions, and people are. I think that I have tremendous respect for Shell, and watch her everyday work, her proverbial whatever, really hard, and belief in architecture, and it's a struggle. She worries about it more than I do, but it's very interesting, the struggle and the depth of endeavor and real belief. So it's very interesting to watch parallel life.
I do think architecture is a collaborative affair, and it really is. It's very important to understand that, and the thing of collaboration and support is an incredibly rich territory. All the people we work with in our office, they're fantastic people, and they are to be credited as much as we are. And sometimes it's the youngest person in the office who comes up with the best idea, and sometimes it's not, so it's I think people shouldn't underestimate the importance of collaboration.
It's what makes our field particularly special. And if you think about all of the fields that encompass some aspect of the arts, it is the nature that nothing is done by a hero, a singular author, that there are many hands and many voices. I know it's very late your time, and I know that many of our students already had to leave for studio, because studio started a little while ago. I know Lalitha has had her hand up. Do you have a quick question, Lalitha?
No, let's let this pass. I'm dying to ask about I'm dying to ask about the curvature of the stairs, and I can wait. I can wait with the hope that we'll all meet again. Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. I said we're hoping that we're going to find a way to bring Shelley and Yvonne here to Texas, because we would love to have you here any way that we can get you here. And I think you would love coming here to Austin, Texas. It's a really amazing place. Thank you so much. This was just spectacular.
Thank you all.
We're so lucky that you joined us, and I hope you have a nice cocktail this evening.
I loved your introduction, Michelle. So before you tear it up, can you send us a copy?
I will send you a copy of it.
Yeah, because we've never been described in that way before, and it's always really interesting to have another light shined in your eyes or whatever. Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Stay well. Okay. Goodbye.
Thank you.